What up, guys? KTOD Matty here with the, believe it or not, the grumpy elephant in person. Not an elephant, not too grumpy, pretty pleasant guy from our little sound mixer. Very patient with me as it took me about 30 minutes to get rolling. What's up, bud?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I try and pretend to be the grumpiest elephant, but just happy to be here, excited to talk about a deck that I love with someone who's really cool.
Thanks, babe. So we got Grumpy Elephant, the architect, the mastermind behind Quinlan ECL, Bounty, Swarm Unit Control. Any other tags we can put on this?
Maximum resource advantage, do more with less, you know. That's
Do
really the philosophy of the deck is how can we do more with fewer resources?
I love that, and we've talked a little bit in DMs and stuff. But like the fact that if you're doing more with less resources, you're taking advantage of like the two cards you draw a turn and like the action economy of the game, right? That's kind of the ethos behind it.
Yeah, I think so many decks are focused on what is the best 2-drop I can play, followed by the best 3-drop I can play, followed by the best 4-drop I can play.
Right.
And this deck is more focused on what is the first turn I can play 2 cards, and can I play 2 cards for each of my opponent's one, and just drown them in how many things I'm doing.
How many bounty hunters quarries can we fit on one unique unit?
That's really the heart of the deck. If I could play 15 of one card, it would be Bounty Hunter's Quarry, and then
Dude,
just all 3 drops, and you're golden.
I'm with you, man. When I started building set 2 decks, I put that card BHQ in everything like Palp, freaking yeah, Kira, like you name it. I think it's sick. I think that as the game goes on, there's gonna be more BHQ in our life.
Help Yellow was the card that turned me onto it. It wasn't in a lot of lists. I think in set 2. And obviously everyone is struggling into Sabine. And so the question was, how can we get more things on the board, again, for fewer resources?
Right.
Turns out they made a nifty 1-drop that lets you get an Emperor's Royal Guard, right? And now all of a sudden you're cooking. This is just flipping that on its head and saying, what if we got a Millennium Falcon instead and surprise strike for 6?
I mean, how can you do any better? And we'll pull back a little bit, but I gotta say, we just had the announcement for some of the prizing for regional sectionals, not worlds yet, I don't think. Bounty Hunter Quarry Matt, where is that on your like? Are you going to everything to?
So
Are you gonna go?
yeah, so I'll be at Minneapolis.
Cool.
I'm actually originally from the Twin Cities, so I was super excited to see that show up. I'll be at Worlds as well. When I started this game, I told myself I was not going to be like a shiny card collector. I said no to showcases. I just got my play set of 3 of the base version. And
Right.
over time, right, like the showcases have been slipping in, and then you win a mat at a PQ, and you're like, this is kind of nice to have. So I will be going for the BHQ mat. I already have my Quinlan showcase. I bought that seconds after I won Chicago, so I don't need to do the like top 64 best of your leader
Oh right,
showcase
yeah. I forgot about
instead there.
that.
But really cool that they're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, once you win, you gotta like commemorate it a little bit, right? Like, even if you didn't have the showcase, like that's a good time to spend. Like let me remember this by like that. I think that is the cool thing of the bling.
My goal going into Chicago actually was to place 5th, because 5th place at Chicago won a Quinlan showcase because they had a really wild prize pool, and I was like, this is the dream. And then I made it to semis, and I was like, well, that dream's dead. So now the
So
new
now you
dream
just
is
gotta win,
yeah,
and hey, while you're at it, maybe win too.
yeah.
So pulling back a little bit, Grumpy Elephant, is this your first TCG? Are you a long time grinder? Like what, where, what, when, how did you start into
Uh,
this journey?
I have been sort of at most a casual player. I started quite young with Pokemon, then into Yu-Gi-Oh! Shout out to my older brother Mark, who was 4 years older. He started playing all of these games. I just wanted to do everything that he did, so I would play whatever game he was playing, and I would just only lose to him. So I never thought of myself as someone who could, be a competitive player. And then in grad school, actually, I found that I just had some sort of extra time on weeknights. There was a really cool game store near me, and I was like, what if I tried playing Magic as an adult? Like, I'm not going to lose to my older brother anymore. I'm going to be
Right.
playing with people I don't know. Like, how's it going to go? And I was fine. Like, I was never an excellent Magic player, but I was good enough. I could win local drafts and that sort of thing. And then that went dormant for really quite a long time, until Arcana came out, which was,
Oh
I
yeah.
felt like the first chance to get into a big game on the ground floor. Part of what overwhelmed me with Magic was just how many cards there were.
Yeah.
Um, And that experience was fun. Lorcana as a game I found a little bit underwhelming. I know a lot of people love it. Props to them. And a friend that I had met from Lorcana in Ann Arbor, where I live now, was talking about a new Star Wars game that was coming out that he was super excited about. And I was like, I like this guy. I'll go to a pre-release with him. And literally one game in that pre-release, and I was hooked. The drawing two cards a turn, the back and forth action
Yeah.
mechanic, it's really fast paced. I love I've always been a sci-fi guy, so the Star Wars skin on it is really compelling. I'm having a lot of fun. I haven't watched a lot of the extra Star Wars content beyond the movies, so as each set comes out, I'm watching all of the shows associated with that
To
set.
like,
So I'm
yeah,
like
pump
learning who all
yourself
of these
up or
people
whatever.
are.
Yeah.
Makes the game like 3 times more enjoyable. So this is my first like really serious. Let's see how far we can go, and that started with my first PQ actually was in Indiana. Went 5-2, and set two was like, this is fun. I'm willing to travel again. Second one was Chicago. I won. Once you get a taste of that, there's just no going back.
Yeah, once you get the taste, man, it's hard to stop. It's funny about like the watching more Star Wars thing. Like a lot of people, like my brother knows that I was like a base guy, like a little bit of Rogue One here, and like small stuff. And then right now I'm watching the Bad Batch because like I love
Mm.
tech and Hunter's so good, or Wrecker's so good. For Hunter, you're not so good. Sorry, bro. You're good in the show though. And I'm like like drawn to like the different characters from the game. What did you play in set two?
In set two, I never really found a home. I started with the new Boba. So my philosophy, I have two philosophies when it comes to choosing a deck. One is I want to build my own deck, um, and two is I prefer to not play the decks that most other people are playing.
Right, a little
Reason
bit of
one
it.
is
Yeah.
I'm a contrary person and like to do my own thing. But reason two is I think there's a real advantage in this game in mastering the play patterns with a deck that you've played 500 games with and your opponents have maybe played once or twice, right? So you're
Yeah.
super familiar with board states that come out and they're like, what's this guy going to do? So I played a deck that I called Rain Boba. It was Boba yellow, splashing cards of every color, getting them off of Cobb, getting them off of Bounty
Oh
Hunter's
yeah.
Quarry, getting them. So I've been on Bounty Hunter's Quarry. As a great search tool for a while. I went back to Palp Yellow, which is what I'd played in set one. Apparently, I'm just a yellow green guy.
Mm.
I brought Bosk Blue to the showcase in Indiana. Um, Went to time on one round and said I'm never bringing
Yeah.
control to a PQ again.
Going to
Um,
going to time double loss. Not even like I played Magic and like getting a draw early in a tournament was like pretty much you were
yeah,
dead. Yeah.
it just feels bad.
Yeah. Not
I
fun.
would rather lose fairly than like run out of time.
Right.
Um, but I never really found a home that I was happy with until I started jamming games with Quinlan ECL.
What's funny too is like that you could almost say like this is an evolution of that Boba deck, right? Because like they do similar things. Like sometimes Quinlan, because he pings, like you can do the ambush thing. It's kind of like getting +1/+0. I know that your deck doesn't have a ton of that, but it is kind of interesting that like some of those similar ideas could kind of be. And I'll pull up the list
Yeah.
now. Um,
I think you're right in terms of like the word evolution. I'm imagining like Pokemon evolutions, right, where they get stronger as they go. This is like it does a lot of the things that the Boba deck did, but it does them better and it does more of them, and it also throws in some unfair uh, mechanics, which I think is really the key to a successful deck right now.
Agreed. So I set up. This is a little Matty behind the scenes. I set up my stream so you can see your deck list if you don't have it in front of you. But I figured that'd be a good time to take a peek, and just kind of like walk us through. I know you said like how early can I play multiple things, but kind of like walk us through some of the inspiration here, and then I'll probably just key in on different cards to talk about. But
Yeah, so I think of pretty much every card in this deck as fulfilling one of three different functions. And I started with the first one, which is how can we get a resource advantage? I want to just have more valuable things on the board than my opponent does, with both of us having spent the same number of resources. And so Bounty Hunter's Quarry, I think, is one of the best examples of that. You've spent one. The meta right now is just a lot of units bashing into each other. So things are going to die. And then your one turns into a three, let alone,
right,
right, the cases where you start with 2 of them and you take your first turn getting 6 resources worth of something, it just starts a steamroll that's really, really hard to stop. And so Bounty Hunter's Quarry, number one fit right away. And then really, I think the combo that lets this deck shine the most is General's Blade, this 3-cost card that they printed um, in Twilight that, right, 3 for 3 upgrade, really powerful. We've just seen like sticking upgrades on leaders can be a really effective way to shut down a lot of decks. But my favorite text on the card is that if it's on a Jedi, on attack, your next
Right.
unit costs less, right? Quinlan Vos happens to be a Jedi as a leader.
Yep.
And so when you deploy Quinlan on 5, you slap a General's Blade on him, you attack. Now all of a sudden you have 4 more resources to spend. You've gotten 7 resources of value, right, on your 5 resource turn. You also have a beefed up leader. And so the name of the game for a while was just like, how many resources total can I get on a turn? If you're activating Cobb Vanth and Bounty Hunter's Quarry and a General's Blade in the same turn, right? Like you're spilling out 11 resources worth of cards when your opponent's just on 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's a great
That
point.
creates pretty impressive boards. The one downside is you're playing lots of small things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're going to go through your hand really quickly. So to pair with all of these small resource advantage cards, Shoot First is another great one. You
Yep.
spend 1 resource, blow up their 5-cost unit. Sure, you don't do base damage, but you've spent a really small number of resources to take care of a threat. Now your hand's empty. So how do we pair the resource advantage cards with card advantage cards, right? Cards that are functionally giving you 2-for-1s or drawing a card. Tech was really the first one that I went to. I know there's a lot of folks who say, Tech's too slow. He only belongs in a really narrow set of decks. I think Tech is one of the best cards to have because you just plop them down in your resource row, right? You
Yep.
play all your cards, you're empty-handed, but now you're at 6 or 7. Okay, well, now I'm playing Tech and something else from my resource row,
Mm-hmm.
even though my hand is empty. So I no longer need the card advantage from drawing cards. I have
Right.
access to the whole second pool. And then the third set of cards to sort of round it out is the burst damage cards, right? You've used your resource advantage to control the board. You've used your card advantage to be able to keep up in the mid game. You need to be able to close it out, especially against decks that, right, like can eventually just like grind control and never give it up. So we've got cards like Falcon, we've got cards like Surprise Strike, we've got cards like Hotshot Blaster as ways to push through that last 5 or 7 or 8 damage, even against decks that think they've put up, right, the biggest wall. If I can smuggle a tech into smuggling a Falcon, I can take a control deck who thinks I'm empty-handed by surprise and get those last 3 after they've claimed. And the number of games that comes up,
Yep.
right? People think they're safe, they claim.
You're basically building a Cassian in the skies, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that keyed in on some interesting things. So that probably explains why you just stop at like the 1/6 drop Falcon, because you're trying to maximize resource. Like when we had early iterations of this deck, one thing that we would do is try to go like untap, attack with Quinlan, and then drop a home 1. And it was kind of like can we do the big beefy thing? You don't even have home 1 in the 60.
No,
Like not even
I
for the
tested
control. Yeah.
after I won Chicago, right, the deck sort of exploded on the deck forum, and a lot of folks were like, "This is a cool deck. I'm going to add in my Hans. I'm going to add in my home ones main board," and I totally get that impulse.
Yeah.
I started testing with home ones. I actually hadn't done a lot of testing with them prior to Chicago, and I found it was doing the opposite of what I wanted, which is I'm now spending 8 or 6 with the discount resources on a big thing, and my opponent gets to fell the dragon or bounce it, right? Like
And
take
then
out my big thing with a small number of resources. That is the opposite of what I want how I want a game to go. So my ideal 7 drop or my ideal 8 drop, let's say,
Yep.
is a smuggled tech followed by a smuggled L3 or a smuggled Leia or a smuggled Surprise Strike, right? Functionally, when you smuggle a card, you're basically adding draw a card onto it,
Right.
right? So I get a tech and an L3. I've spent 8 resources for 2 okay units, but I've also functionally drawn 2 cards. That's great if I already have board control. If you don't have board control at that point, you're probably sunk because you need to be doing more.
Yep.
So if I can get board control, which is everything this deck is trying to do on resources 1 through 6,
Mm-hmm.
then getting that smuggle engine going becomes nearly unstoppable.
And that really makes sense too of why you'd want tech and why you'd want smuggle in a deck like this, because you are trying to spew those cards out, and so the cards in your hand don't matter if your hand is also your row. So that's a really cool angle. So one,
Another thing I'll quickly
yeah,
add
sure,
is a lot of these cards are still good, even if we ignore the sort of like draw effect bonus of smuggle. A
right,
lot of these cards are still good, even if they cost 2 more. There's a lot of scenarios where shoot first for 3 still feels great if you're killing
yeah,
their 6 drop or their 7 drop. If you need a sentinel, right, Gamorrean Retainer for 4 in a pinch feels awesome. I don't care that it costs 4. If you need an exhaust, layer for 4 feels awesome. So
yeah.
having this whole toolbox of cards in the row that are low enough cost that you can smuggle them in a pinch, right? Adds just a whole ton of versatility to what the deck can do.
So on top of like the whole idea that this is a deck that is um kind of built around maximizing resource, were there certain like matchups that you were targeting when you made it, or was it more like these matchups were maybe like a byproduct? Like how did that
Yeah.
puzzle piece fit into the meta, and what kept you on it once you kind of figured it out?
So I would say it was less a specific matchup other than, and more of just a bird's eye view of what the meta looks like, which is you always need to be mindful of Sabine, right?
Right.
And Sabine ECL is so fast. It threatens big threats like ECL Poe and ECL Wrecker, but it also can just like rush you down with wing leaders and fleet lieutenants. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have like the grindiest decks like Palp Yellow or Bosk Blue, right? Which aren't trying to beat you early. They're just trying to like overwhelm you with later board control and card advantage. And I feel like a lot of decks sort of hone for one and then give up their matchup for the other. And I was like, I want to find a deck, right? I want to find a strategy that can take on both of those things. And so I guess I start by thinking about Sabine, because if you lose to Sabine, the deck's sort of out of contention from my
Yeah,
mind.
I
So I was
agree with
like,
that.
that's where the resource advantage really came in, right? If I can beat Sabine by just getting bigger things faster on the board, she'll have a hard time wearing me down. And that's ultimately where the really powerful combo of Gamorrean Retainer and Hu Yang came in. I
Got it.
originally didn't have Gamorrean Retainer in my list until I realized, oh shit, getting a 5/4 Sentinel on the second turn makes it really hard for Sabine to keep up. And then if you can put a General's Blade onto the Hu Yang on the 4 resource turn, the game is basically over
Yeah.
because they can't ECL Poe yet. And so I felt like I had the tools to get that matchup under control, but I was like, what can I pair these tools with
Hmm.
to then also be able to contend with the other end of the spectrum? The thing that I realized was like, let's take Bosk Blue for an example. Sure, they get some card advantage if they can get a Dr. Pershing or throw a Death Mark and double bounty it. But most of their cards are just pure 1-for-1
Hmm.
removal. They're powering you, they're open firing you, they're taking you down. If they use Vigilance, they can defeat one thing. Even Avenger defeats one thing.
Right.
So I was like, okay, what if we make their 1-for-1 trades just really bad?
Feel
Right. And so
terrible.
that's where
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
sure, power my cob. I'm going to replace it with a battlefield marine. I still have 3 power on the board. That's where the smuggled tech came in. It was like, okay, you kill 2 things with super laser blast. Now you're still facing 2 units, and one of them's a cob, and one of them's a smuggled tech. Of just making them feel bad about using these 1-for-1 cards. And it turned out that both of those strategies were working. Um, I follow most of the sort of PQ recaps that content creators make, and Thork talked about my deck, my Lancing deck, in his most recent recap, and he was like, I just don't see how this deck can win games against control. And I think it's understandable. You look at it, a deck that caps out at 5, how's it going to go the long game against control?
Right.
Turns out 3 techs with a lot of other smuggle options can go real long, and
Yeah.
things like Falcon can squeak in that last damage. Um, and then everything that followed was, okay, the core of this deck is an idea that works. Let's start to tune it for the meta heavy hitters. So then I considered, what is Django doing? What is CAD doing? Um, that sort of thing. And cards got added or moved out based on matchups that I thought I was likely to see. But the original principle was, is there something that can have a good matchup into aggro while also having a good matchup into control?
Yeah. I mean, I think that point really well stands about the control thing of like, yeah, you're a low curve, but if you just keep like whittling them down, like eventually, especially if you can find a way to keep them off of, like a big double bounty, although we're seeing less Boss Blue actually, so kind of easier there. Yeah, eventually, like,
Also,
they
so
do kind of run out of cards at times.
yeah, turns out like ECL Ayla pretty good at stopping the double bounty. This deck has a lot of ways to threaten 6
Oh, right.
power
Yeah,
on
that's a
the
good
5
point.
turn.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think I think Bosk greens are a lot better equipped to get a double bounty off against me than Bosk blue.
Yeah, they can get
Just
ahead
with
on curve. Yeah, the ramp. Um, so when you played at those PQs, like what matchups did you hit? Like, walk me through some of those games and like how they went, like how the PQs just went. I mean, you
yeah.
won, so they
I
went
mean,
well.
I saw pretty much exactly what you would expect. So Lansing's obviously the freshest in my mind.
Yeah.
Um, I went Bosk Green into a Quinlan Tarkin Town, into a Django Tarkin Town, into a Han Yellow, into an Anakin, into I'm forgetting my sixth round, into a sort of cool off meta deck Obi-Wan Yellow,
Hmm.
into a Sabine in the quarterfinals. So all of the things that you would expect, all of
Yeah.
the things that folks are probably practicing against. Um, and it, for the most part, went how I'd hoped, which is one, it was clear that my opponents didn't have reps against my deck,
Right.
right? I was doing hundreds of games, learning the patterns against theirs. This was maybe their third or fourth game ever against a Quinlan ECL. So that is the one sort of sad side effect of doing well. More people are looking at this deck. Um, I'd say if you're still a skeptic about this deck, my message to you would be like, feel free to ignore it. There's nothing to see here.
Move
Just a
along.
little lone ECL flying under the radar. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine.
Not the
Obviously,
deck list you're looking
that
for.
perfect. Exactly. Exactly. Not the cards you're looking for, not the leader you think you want to see. Um, but then once you sit down, the game plan is pretty much the same for every deck. It's take turns 1 through 3 to control the board the best you can. Quinlan's ping is huge for that.
Right.
Quinlan's ping plus bounties let you get really favorable trades and also start swarming the board. Usually resources 5, 6, 7, then you've got pretty good control of the board. It's about pushing as much damage as you can. Right, there's turns where I would do 1 to 2 damage to the base total for the first 4 turns of the game, and then you do 12 to 15, right, for each of the next turns. And then if it's against a more controlling matchup, usually they're able to slow you down by that point, and it's can you find ways to squeak through the remaining damage. So just to give a sense of matchups that I remember,
Sure.
the 2 decks I did not want to see sitting down across from me were one Kira Green, Kira
Mm.
ECL. I don't think a single person this may be true. I don't think a single person was playing Kira
Yeah,
at the
she really
time.
fell off the radar until like this past week where two of them
Mhm.
won.
Which was great news for me. I sort of came in at the right time.
Yeah.
And
That
then Boss Green, which unfortunately I ended up having to play 3 times over the course of the day, including it was my one loss in Swiss, and then I faced another one, the teammate of the guy I lost to in Swiss in the finals. And the reason is, right, everything I've described, you're putting out a lot of small guys on the board. Cards like Overwhelming Barrage just sort of laugh
eat
at
you up.
you.
Yeah.
And they're doing the thing that I want to do, which is they're spending one card to take care of a whole number of things. Um, so the strategy, uh, I guess I'll just talk through the
Yeah,
strategy for
sure.
Boss Queen for a second.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did you navigate that? Like, especially like,
Yeah.
I don't see Spark of Rebellion, which could be an asset to
No,
you, and I don't see like you have spare the target obviously because you have bounty, so it's not like you can't waylay your own thing. So yeah, I am curious like how you're able
yeah.
to get through that one.
So no Sparks. That was actually two of the big changes from Chicago to Lansing, where I took the Sparks out of the sideboard and I took the Curas. I don't remember if they were in the main or the side, but I took them out. And I realized I wanted to focus all of my energy on controlling the board. I felt pretty confident that I could handle anything anyone threw at me on the board. So I just didn't need to worry about
Okay.
what was in their hand. Let them feel like they've drawn their best cards. The one exception is Overwhelming Barrage, right? Like that's a card that I would love to be able to target, but I was willing to give up some points against that to just feel really confident about board control. And Spark and Kira just didn't feel like they were helping with that. So the theory number one, backing up 1 second. So I found myself I was losing, right? Boss Green was sort of growing in popularity, and I was
Yep.
starting to lose to it more and more. And I was like, what's the problem? The problem here is number one, they're ramping. So they're getting their leader out faster than I can. And number two, they're getting double bounties. Um, how do I stop those two things? I did not even start with saying, what's my game plan to win? I was like, simply, how do I stop the worst things they can do? I'll say that's the same philosophy I take with the Han matchup. I do not worry about winning the game when I sit down across from yellow Han. The only question I have is, how do I stop the Han flip turn from letting him get an Enfys or a Han when
Like,
I'm still at
yeah,
5 resources?
yeah.
If you can navigate that critical point, the rest of the game just is wide open, and it becomes who can play better Star Wars Unlimited. Um, so with Boss specifically, I realized I'm losing because they're ramping. What if I ramp also? There were
And
some
that's
folks
why
in
the
Discord,
resupplies came back
yeah,
in.
who were saying, "What about resupply?" And I had sort of, laughed it off. And then I was like, I'm losing because I'm not ramping. What if I ramp? And I found if I resupply and they super laser tech and I bounce their super laser tech, then I'm at 5 before them.
Yep.
Red Green really struggles with dealing with big units early, so I slap a General's Blade on Quinlan, and then we go to town.
Yeah.
All of the boss I played learned that pretty quickly at the PQ, so we were just like dueling resupplies the whole time. No one ever let me bounce their super laser tech.
Yeah.
So resupply was the big one, and then the other thing I realized is if I'm in a resupply and jump from 3 to 5, I don't want either of us to play a turn one card. So I just started passing really liberally,
Hmm.
which is a strategy that I had started in Chicago. I will always pass into another Quinlan. I will always pass into a CAD. Um, I feel pretty confident that my resource cheat cards are better than theirs. If I can get BHQ and General's Blade, I'm like still swarming the board even if we skip the first turn. So he's like, okay, Bosk, we'll both skip the first turn. We'll both resupply, and then I'll throw a blade on my Quinlan and threaten to take out your Bosk, and you can't get anything to threaten me back really until 7, like maybe with a Maul or a Vader.
Right.
Um, and it was that strategy that worked really, really well. I went 2-0 against my first boss screen. I lost 1-2 to the second really strong player. And then I sat down in the finals and I was like, ooh, does the run end here? And we did game 3 of finals were 1-1. We follow that exact same thing, but he had uh, initiative, I believe. So he flips Bosk, and I want to flip Quinlan. We're both at 5. We've both done nothing else, and I want to flip Quinlan, but I know he's going to barrage me,
Right.
which has stopped me from doing things. So I said, okay, I don't have coordinate up, but let's ECL Ayla take out his leader. And the face he gave me, right? He looked so distressed because I was like, oh, I just like made the read. Overwhelming barrage was the only thing he wanted to do that turn.
Right.
Now he can't, and he was never able to catch up after that.
You just he had like nothing. You just like straight up time
I
walked
mean,
into it. I mean, he might have
played
had
the
like
Trooper,
right.
which I like ate with Quinlan, and then
Yeah.
bladed Quinlan the next turn, and then put another blade
And
on
you're just
Quinlan.
the double
Um,
blade. Yeah,
the
that is
double bladed,
nasty.
right? This deck, if you draw 2 Bounty Hunters Quarries, golden. If you draw 2 Generals Blades, golden.
Yeah, you're chilling.
Um, 2 Aylas, you're unhappy about that because you really only want one.
Yeah, yeah. It's not
Um,
like you have timely or anything. So yeah,
No, and
once you
I
see,
had Timely in earlier versions, um, and ultimately just cut it for space, right? Like I have a
yeah,
lot of 2-ofs. I would love to be 3s. I would love 3 surprise strikes. I would love 3 blasters. I'd love 3 spare the targets, and there just wasn't
50
room.
cards feels tight.
The new green base. Let's all play it. Let's run 60.
I like it.
Um,
Well, hey, that's
and
actually a really good segue. Like, you know, we're getting the set 4 cards rolling in. Like as you see those and it as you look for updates, like what cards from the next set are you like excited to try to jam in here?
yeah,
If any, or is it
yeah,
like
it's not been the most inspiring season for this deck specifically, in part because I joke that I'm allergic to space. Right, the only space units right now are the 3 Falcons, and then actually added the 2 Bright Hopes as a concession to growing boss green threats. And then Django was starting to figure out this matchup, so I was like, okay, the 2/6 Sentinel is going to be helpful for that. But for a while it was and then the Big Falcon. For a
yeah,
while it
Big
was
Falcon.
just the 3 Baby Falcons and the Big Falcon. So it's like I'm not going to be putting pilots on anything. I just want
Right.
vehicle. The one card that has really piqued my interest is it the blue leader? It's the 3/3 ambush for 3 in green. When you play it, you can pay 2 to move it to the ground arena
Oh,
for
yeah,
2
yeah.
experience. And the reason I'm really interested in it, I'm less interested in it as like a space option. Falcon is so good against like Sabine space openings that I don't feel like I need
Right.
another 3 cost unit to answer. But it's getting it off of Bounty Hunter's Quarry, paying the 2, and functionally getting a 5/5 ambush on the ground from Bounty Hunter's Quarry feels like a really
Yeah, no, that's a
exciting
good point. And you
right?
can get like the ping. So like if you like flip Quinlan, do the ambush, kill something for 5, finish off something that was like, a 3 cost or
Yeah.
less. That's yeah.
Sadly, the ping will only hit something for 3.
Yeah, yeah. So it'd have to
That
be
is my other
small.
favorite thing about it is when he's flipped. I had several opponents be like, "You can only do that once per turn," and he's like, "No, no, no.
Nope.
When Quinlan is flipped many times, it feels like a mini overwhelming barrage.
Yeah,
When you're
especially when you're
topping, BHQing,
exactly.
right? The pings just never
The
stop coming.
pings never stop coming. Well, hey man, this was awesome to kind of run through your. I mean, this was like 30 minutes in the weeds. Like people who are into just Star Wars Unlimited are gonna be stoked. Like, just I think that no matter what deck you play, like there was something there. Like the philosophy on the game, maximizing resources, how you adapt to a certain meta. I think there was a lot of good stuff in there, man. So I really appreciate your time, and
Yeah,
congrats on the 2 PQs, dude. That's some insane stuff.
thank you. Feels good. I am retiring for the next month or so. Gonna take a little break, refresh my brain, wait for set 4 to come out, and then see if we can keep the ECL Quinlan train going, or if I need to jump ship because of all these pilots running around.
You might jump ship, but you still have Bounty Hunter's Quarry.
Oh, 3 of. It's the first when I make a new deck on Swooty B, first card I add 3 of Bounty Hunter's Quarry. The other 47 are just potatoes on the top.
A man after my own heart. Booyah. We out.
All right. Thanks, guys.